Welcome back to NewsX World. I'm Pia and you're watching Focal Length, where we get you a briefing on topics from across the world. High-stakes diplomacy is underway in the Middle East, focusing on peace and regional stability. In Cairo, efforts to implement the first phase of Trump's peace plan for Gaza faces challenges, including reconciling Palestinian factions and Hamas's role. Meanwhile, the EU-GCC meetings in Kuwait aim to address broader regional issues, while Syria is taking cautious steps towards political transition. Meanwhile, tensions between Yemen's Houthi rebels and Israel escalates. These developments highlight the complexity of achieving lasting peace in the region. Joining us now is Chris Doyle, Director and Lead Spokesperson of CAABU, that is the Council for Arab-British Understanding. An acknowledged expert on the region, Chris is a frequent commentator on television and radio and regularly published in British and international media. He holds conversations across the country and the world on issues including the Arab Spring, Libya, Syria, Palestine, Iraq, Islamophobia and the Arab community in Britain. Today we'll be discussing the high-stakes talks in Cairo, addressing the likelihood of Trump's peace plan leading to lasting resolution in Gaza. We'll also be highlighting the challenges of reconciling the Palestinian Authority and Hamas's postures and attitudes and the uncertainty around lessons that we can learn from past efforts. Thank you so much for joining us. At the outset, I'd like to point towards the fact that yes, high-stakes talks are taking place in Cairo. Donald Trump has stated that the first phase of his peace plan is likely to be implemented by the end of this week. How optimistic are you of this deal, and do you think it paves the way to long-term peace?
I think Palestinians in Gaza, the ones I've spoken to, are daring to hope, but it is a very, very delicate moment. There are so many things that can get in the way of a successful first stage in all of this, because the Trump proposals, these 20 points, are very vague. But I think the first actions probably have more clarity than the rest of the plan. So I think that a ceasefire is certainly on the cards. We don't know how long that would last. There's no guarantees it's going to be permanent. Then you have aid getting into Gaza at scale using, and this is really important, the United Nations, because that's the only body that can do this properly. And just to remind you, of course, that famine is spreading across Gaza. It's been declared in many areas of it. The people are starving, malnourished. The health system is down, so medical care is required. And then, of course, the release of the remaining Israeli hostages, those who are still alive, the dead bodies, and the release of Palestinian prisoners and detainees. Now, those detainees are the ones who've actually been held without trial. So in all what we're seeing, those elements, which of course are really crucial because of the genocide that's been going on in Gaza, even a short pause would be extremely welcome. And maybe that could provide a platform for an improved schedule of later stages under the Trump proposals, such as they are.
Indeed, and speaking about Trump's 20-point plan, it provides for the creation of an international board of peace to oversee post-war reconstruction of Gaza. However, Hamas has so far remained mum on this and has till now supported a future technocratic Palestinian leadership. In your assessment, could this emerge as a sticking point in negotiations down the line?
Well, the issue of governance, which you're referring to, is crucial. And just to remind you, this is a deal effectively between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump. There were no Palestinians involved in drawing up these proposals. And whilst, as I said, the first stage will be very welcome, the next stages are essentially very neo-colonial, because you set up in this a Palestinian technocratic committee with international experts who, we don't know how they're going to be selected, who would run the day-to-day affairs of Gaza. But it would be supervised, and that's the word that is used, by this Board of Peace, which would be chaired by President Trump and include former British Prime Minister Tony Blair. And it's that supervision that points to this, colonial idea that Palestinians can't run their own affairs, that they're not fit to govern. And that is something that's not going to be acceptable to Hamas, but not going to be acceptable to any Palestinian. They want to be able to run Gaza. They want to be able to run Gaza as part of a broader Palestinian polity, Palestinian state. That's certainly what most Palestinians still support. That includes the West Bank. But there is no horizon for that in these proposals. What I think should have happened is that whilst you negotiate with Hamas over the release of hostages and a ceasefire, maybe it's demilitarization, which Hamas has refused, the future of Gaza Strip and who runs it should have been negotiated with the Palestinian Authority and President Abbas, because at least that has some degree, albeit imperfect, of legitimacy. It has a structure, it has ministries, and that would have allowed also the political reunification of the two parts of what many countries have now recognized as a state of Palestine.
And so, what challenges do you foresee in reconciling the different Palestinian factions, especially Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, within the framework of this peace plan?
Well, I think this peace plan doesn't do that at all. If anything, it probably polarizes further the situation rather than trying to bring them together. Hamas is obviously massively weakened, but also the Palestinian Authority and its key component, Fatah, have not been able to pick up the pieces. They are not the ones in Cairo negotiating with the Americans and the Israelis. So that's a huge issue. One has to question what their strategy is. But certainly regional powers should be pressing for the Palestinian Authority to be the key interlocutor to represent Palestinians. And let's face it, the United States, Israel, and many other countries consider Hamas to be a terrorist group. Now, people can agree or disagree with that, but they are actually giving Hamas, this group, the ability to determine and to agree or not agree to a plan that lays out the future for Gaza. Well, that is a contradiction. If you don't consider that Hamas is fit to be in Gaza, that it shouldn't run its affairs, then why are the Americans and the Israelis insisting that Hamas signs off on what the future of Gaza should be?
All right, sir, and what lessons can be learned from previous international peace efforts in Gaza, especially when implementing the current plan?
Well, first of all, and this I think is for the Europeans, for Middle East actors, West Asia actors, it's that the United States is not an honest broker. It is extremely partisan. And we've seen that consistently, regardless of who is president. They bring their own different political characteristics, but support for Israel, at least, has been very consistent. It's its largest backer. Israel would not have been able to prosecute its genocide without American military assistance, without its political and economic support. And I think that's really important. Secondly, and I repeat this because it's so important, you have to have Palestinian agency. You cannot try to impose upon them some form of deal. You have to accept that at the end of this, that there is going to be a Palestinian state. And thirdly, all of this has to equal an end of the Israeli occupation. It cannot leave that in place. Palestinians have to be free, liberated from the yoke of a military occupation that's continued consistently since 1967. And if you don't do that, you are basically leaving the conflict in place. You're leaving all the reasons why the conflict will persist. That's going to be challenging. I mean, given what has happened, and I think one of the biggest criticisms of Israel and the Israeli approach to this is always to believe that force is the answer, that there is a military solution. Yes, they've pummeled Gaza, they've leveled it. Most of the buildings are destroyed or beyond use. But in the end, they still have to live with 7 million Palestinians in the occupied Palestinian territory. 20% of their population are Palestinian citizens of Israel. And what sort of indication does this give to them about that future? For sure, and we're coming up, obviously tomorrow is the anniversary of the 7th of October atrocities. Israelis have every reason to be fearful and dislike Hamas. But Hamas are not all Palestinians. And what I think is happening is actually young people are seeing Hamas as a possibility because of the genocidal rhetoric and actions of the Israeli authorities.
Indeed, sir. And there are certain other crucial developments taking place in the Middle East. A series of EU-GCC meetings are set to take place in Kuwait. What do you think these will yield?
Well, these sorts of meetings and a trade deal between the EU and GCC have been, talked about and discussed. It's always challenging because you've got two large blocks, 6 GCC member states, and they have varying interests. Of course, predominantly they are hydrocarbon rich with oil and gas, but there are sometimes rivalries within that. They don't always have the same approach. But the bigger problem actually is with the European Union, this 27-member bloc. There have been lots of elections, and we've just seen the elections in the Czech Republic, where different political parties are coming to power, including some on the populist right, and getting unity within Europe is really quite challenging. So it is important, and I think it's also important because of the context in terms of trade, and having a free trade deal obviously matters, because we've seen what the Trump administration is doing with tariffs, the way in which it's using tariffs as a form of control, of bullying, regardless of its impact on the American economy itself, its inflationary effect. So other powers, other trade blocs need to work with each other to shield themselves from the possible impact of further tariff rises from the United States.
And sir, coming to Syria, we've recently seen Syria has held its first parliamentary elections since the fall of the Assad regime. Although there has been no direct popular vote, is this then a cautious step in political transition towards democratization in the long run?
Well, let's hope so. We're in a very, very delicate stage in Syria. It's been now, 10 months since the fall of the Assad regime in Syria that had, dominated the country, decimated the country. And it's a very traumatized population, and still the economy is extremely fragile. Sanctions are slowly being lifted by key states, but it will take time for that economy to pick up. So at the moment, what we are seeing is tentative transitional steps. I think there's a great deal of caution about that because we have seen that the new authorities have not been entirely inclusive. We have seen issues in the predominantly Druze areas in the south, with the Alawi-dominated areas up in the coastal hills, and there are still issues in the Kurdish-dominated areas in the northeast around Haskeh and Raqqa, where there weren't any elections yesterday, along with Sweda. So, yeah, these are many steps, but I hope that the major international actors will continue to put pressure on these new authorities to be as inclusive as possible, not to allow one particular group, identity group, to dominate, to share power, because that's the only way that Syria will go forward as a successful, unified entity.
Absolutely, sir. And one final question. We're also seeing tensions escalating between Yemen's Houthi rebels and Israel. We've in fact witnessed a series of missile attacks by either side escalating over the last couple of months. If this persists, could this then complicate broader regional peace efforts?
Well, as you say, the Houthis have been firing missiles against Israel. Israel has been hitting Houthi targets within Yemen. It is really frustrating to see this and the attacks on shipping because it's not clear what all of this is achieving, except greater suffering and destruction. I mean, attacks on shipping have put up prices globally. It's had that inflationary effect. Yemen already has been racked by civil war now for a long time. It's an extremely poor country. And the last thing that ordinary Yemenis need is to be caught up in another conflict where fuel depots are being bombed, other pieces of civilian infrastructure as well. Because what we really need to be looking at is how to heal Yemen, how to rebuild its economy, get it back on its feet. And the Houthis at the moment are trying to exploit the situation. They are obviously exploiting the very widespread and genuine anger against what Israel is doing in Gaza. And so by firing missiles, it's demonstrating it's taking action. But to be very honest, it's not really having that much of an impact on Israel. Most of those missiles are knocked out and don't land. If anything, I think it's counterproductive. I hope that if there is a ceasefire in Gaza, if there is some moves forwards, that the Houthis will stop, and Israel likewise, because this really isn't achieving anything.
All right, with that, I would like to thank you, Mr. Chris Doyle, for taking out time speaking to us on Focal Length today. With that, viewers, it's a wrap on this episode of Focal Length. For more international news and updates, stay tuned on NewsX World.